Lonely rancher found the wounded Seminole girl, and a journey began. Dust Devil Gulch, California-Nevada border, July 1879. The sun hung high and merciless above the scorched earth, baking the desert into a brittle crust. Dust rose with each gust of wind, swirling like ghosts over the jagged hills and forgotten mining claim. The old fence, once a proud boundary for someone's dream of riches, now sagged like broken bones, rusted wire rattling softly in the heat. Jedediah Vance didn't come here to chase gold. Not anymore. Perched atop his weather-worn gelding, Jed stared across the empty dig site. His hat shaded a face carved by years of sun, silence, and sorrow. He rode these hills not to remember, but because something deep in the dirt still whispered to him. Not gold truth, answers, justice, maybe, or the memory of a promise that had once meant something. He dismounted slowly, the ground crunching under his boots. His gaze scanned the landscape with a miner's eye and a mourner's heart. The slopes were riddled with collapsed shafts and sunken ground, evidence of men who had clawed at the earth hoping to strike it rich, only to find their graves. Jed knew the feeling. Years ago, he'd been part of it, part of a team that stumbled on a vein so rich it could have fed 3 generations. They'd agreed to leave it untouched. Too unstable, too cursed, too dangerous. Only someone hadn't kept that promise. He was tracing a familiar path toward the southern ridge when something made him stop, a glint in the distance. Movement? He narrowed his eyes. There, near the boundary fence where the mining plot abutted another tract, one too small to matter to most, something was wrong. He approached cautiously, hand resting near the revolver on his hip. The wind shifted. Then he saw her, Serafina Vargas. She was bound to the fence, arms twisted cruelly behind her, body bruised and bloodied. Her long black hair hung in matted clumps over her face, her dress ripped at the seams. A crude wooden sign was staked into the ground beside her. The words carved into it stopped Jed cold. Traitor, a lesson for those who resist progress. His stomach turned to stone. He knew the message wasn't just for her. It was a warning for anyone who dared stand in the way of the men carving their fortunes out of this God-forsaken land, regardless of who bled for it. Sarah's eyes fluttered open as his shadow fell over her. Her lips, cracked and dry, parted as if to speak, but her body tensed instead. She tried to recoil, to fight, even bound and broken. Jed saw something in her eyes, fury, pride, pain but not fear. He crouched slowly, hands open. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, voice low, steady. "Name's Jed Vance." She struggled harder. "Don't touch me," she rasped. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Jed didn't flinch. "I was once. Now I'm not much of anything." He drew his knife, careful and deliberate, and began slicing through the bindings. She winced as the rope bit into her skin, leaving angry welts. He could feel her trembling, but it wasn't from weakness. She was steel wrapped in scars. Once freed, she collapsed into his arms. Reflexively, she tried to crawl away, but her body betrayed her. Jed caught her gently and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She looked up, eyes glassy but defiant. "They want my land," she muttered. "Said I was standing in the way of progress. My father warned me. Said the ground wasn't just rock and roots. Said it had a memory, a hunger." Jed looked out over the hills, jaw tightening. He knew the story. Her land was supposed to be worthless, a patch of rock and sagebrush that no miner cared for until rumors started surfacing again. Rumors of a vein, a cursed one. "They sent a message," she said bitterly. "And I heard it loud and clear. Metter." Jed said nothing. His eyes burned, not from the sun, but from something colder. He lifted her onto his horse with care, ignoring her weak protests, and led the animal back toward his cabin nestled between 2 granite ridges. The journey was slow. The desert offered no comfort, only silence. A silence Jed had grown used to. But now it felt wrong, like the earth was holding its breath. When they reached the cabin, little more than a timber box anchored in stone, Jed eased her down and carried her inside. He laid her on a cot near the fire, fetched water from the barrel, and started cleaning her wounds. She hissed at the sting, but didn't pull away. She watched him with wary eyes. "You're too quiet," she said finally. Jed looked up. "You've been through enough words for one day." That earned a bitter laugh from her cracked lips. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the room smelled of salve and smoke. Jed moved with the efficiency of a man used to patching up pain his own and others. Sarah didn't thank him, but she didn't stop him either. As night fell, and the stars bled into view above the desert sky, she finally whispered, "Why did you help me?" Jed paused by the fire, stirring a pot of beans. "Because I've seen what they do to people who say no," he said. "Because someone once asked me for help and I was too late." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. Sarah turned her face toward the wall, her shoulders trembling just once. Not from pain this time, from the weight of something heavier. Jed stared into the fire, and in its crackling light, he saw not flames but memory. The screams, the smoke, the silence that came after, and above it all, the whisper of gold buried deep in the earth. Waiting. Dawn broke with a hush over the desert, no fanfare, just a slow wash of pale light that bled over the ridges and slipped into the narrow windows of Jedediah Vance's cabin. Inside, it found Serafina Vargas curled beneath a woven blanket, her breath shallow but steady. Jed had been up for hours. He moved like a ghost across the room, adding logs to the fire, stirring a pot of coffee, checking his rifle. Not out of paranoia, out of habit. Men like him didn't sleep much, not when the past kept knocking at the door. Sarah stirred. Her eyes blinked open, dark and cautious. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She took in the room, the rough-hewn walls, the patched ceiling, the smell of smoke and saddle oil. Then her eyes settled on him. "You kept me alive," she said, voice rasped. Jed didn't look up from the fire. "Figured you deserved the chance to do it yourself." She swung her legs off the cot, wincing. "You always this helpful to strangers?" "No," he said. "Most folks aren't worth the effort." That earned a flicker of something, maybe a smile, maybe not. Jed poured 2 tin mugs of coffee and handed her one. She sipped slowly, watching him over the rim. He didn't press her, didn't ask who had tied her to that fence, or why they left her with a sign full of hate. He figured she'd talk when she was ready. Or not at all. "You know who did it," she said finally. He nodded. "Blackwood. Mel." Another nod. "He wants my land." "I know." She stared into the mug. "They say there's nothing on it. Not a vein. Not even a trickle." Jed's jaw tightened. "They're lying." Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't the hard kind. It was the kind that waits, the kind that gives. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the canyons like a warning. By late morning, she was strong enough to stand. Jed watched from the porch as she limped to the edge of the bluff behind the cabin. The land stretched out before her, rock, dust, thornbrush, and far beyond, the town, Dust Devil Gulch. A town rising too fast, built on hunger, not hope. She stood there for a long time. When she returned, her eyes were clearer, harder. "I need to stop him," she said. Jed met her gaze. "Then you need proof." They rode into town that afternoon. Jed kept his hat low, his rifle slung loose. Sarah wore a scarf to hide her bruises, but her eyes told the truth. The streets were louder now, miners, traders, mercenaries passing through like wolves in dust. The town pulsed with tension and greed. Every saloon echoed with rumors of gold. They stopped at the courthouse. It looked like any other frontier building, 2 stories, whitewashed, with columns that pretended at justice. Inside, it smelled of ink, sweat, and something colder. Fear dressed as order. Judge Elias Blackwood stood behind a desk that was too polished, too proud. His silver hair was combed back, his mustache trimmed sharp. He smiled when he saw Jed and Sarah. "Mr. Vance," he said, voice smooth as oil. "And Miss Vargas. What an unexpected visit." Sarah didn't flinch. "You tried to kill me." Blackwood raised his brows. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Vargas." Jed stepped forward. And yet, not surprising, the judge's smile didn't fade. "I'm simply enforcing the law. Eminent domain allows the town to repurpose unused land for the good of the community." Jed snorted. "Funny. That land's been in her family for generations. Never heard of the town caring until rumors of gold surfaced again. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. You'd be wise not to interfere. Jed leaned in, slow and steady. And you'd be wise not to assume I scare easy. The judge held his gaze for a beat, then shrugged. Progress waits for no one, Mr. Vance, and sometimes it demands sacrifice. They left without another word. Back at the cabin, Sarah sat beside the fire, her face tight with thought. My father, she said, used to talk about the land like it was alive, said it knew things, remembered things. Jed nodded. Some dirt don't forget. She glanced at him. He never let anyone dig, not even him. Said there was a reason. Most folks think it's superstition. Most folks never live for it. Jed understood. He told her then about his own family, the day the fire took everything. How the map was lost. How the truth vanished in smoke and silence. I thought it was bad luck, he said. Now I think it was something worse. She looked at him, really looked. You think Blackwood was there? I think he made his fortune on what he stole. Sarah went quiet. Then, almost too soft to hear, I have something. She reached into her satchel, pulled out a weathered Bible. Inside, folded between brittle pages, was a map. Hand-drawn, marked with symbols and warnings. My father hid it here, she said. Told me never to follow it. Told me to burn it if anyone ever came asking. Jed unfolded it carefully. His eyes scanned the lines, the ridges, the red X at the center. His breath caught. I know this place, he whispered. My father and yours. They found it together. Sarah's voice shook. Then one of them died for it, and the other disappeared. Jed looked up. No, he said. The other became a judge. Lo. Night blanketed the desert like a shroud. Stars dim behind a curtain of drifting dust. In the flickering light of Jed's lantern, the old map lay stretched across the wooden table like a wound reopened. Sarah traced her fingers over the symbols, spirals, jagged lines, sunbursts. He said these weren't just warnings, she murmured. They were promises. Jed sat across from her, his jaw tight, eyes unreadable. He had stared at the same patterns in childhood, in the margins of his father's journal, never understanding. Not until now. He wasn't just trying to protect you, Jed said. He was trying to keep everyone out. A knot formed in Sarah's throat. He knew what greed would do. Outside, the wind howled like a memory. By morning, the map had led them beyond the familiar ridges, into the heart of a canyon no one dared to name. Jed moved with practiced ease, guiding their horses along the dry creek beds, past coyote dens and rusted mine carts swallowed by time. Sarah rode behind, her eyes sharp despite the bruises. How far does this go, she asked. All the way to the end of everything, Jed replied. If the map's right. Then, they camped beneath a wall of red rock that rose like a cathedral, where their fire cracked low and careful. The desert didn't forgive noise. Sarah stared into the flames. You think the vein's real? The gold? Jed didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think it's more than gold. She looked at him. He added, it's truth, buried deep. Back in Dust Devil Gulch, Judge Elias Blackwood tapped ash from his cigar onto a silver tray. He stood in his office, clean, ornate, cold. Around him, deputies stood in silence, awaiting orders. Vargas is alive, Blackwood said, his voice calm, and she's with Vance. A grumble rippled through the room. Should have finished the job, one muttered. Blackwood turned, slowly, deliberately. That girl is sitting on more gold than this town has ever dreamed of. You want to shoot her, you better find the deed first. Another deputy frowned. Thought you said there was no gold. The judge smiled. That's what I said, not what I believe. He poured a glass of bourbon, took a slow sip. Find them, quietly. I want her land signed over before the boom. No witnesses, no blood unless I say so. 3 days later, Sarah and Jed returned to the outskirts of the ranch. The land looked the same, but everything felt different. We found the marker, Jed said as they dismounted. Vein runs right under your east ridge. Sarah glanced at the soil. He always said it sang at night. Jed raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. Old stories. The kind you only believe when no one's listening. That night, she dug out her father's Bible again. Hidden inside was more than the map, old letters, receipts, a photograph, Two men in mining gear, smiling under the shadow of youth. One was Jed's father, the other was hers. Jed stared at it a long time. They were partners. Until someone else came along, Sarah said. Someone they trusted. Jed didn't speak. He didn't have to. At dawn, they rode into town again, not for violence, not yet, but for truth. The courthouse was quieter this time. Blackwood wasn't there. They stepped inside anyway. Jed led her to the records room, a narrow hall of dust and shelves. He moved like he knew where to look because he did. Here, he said, pulling down a file wrapped in twine. He opened it slowly, revealing land grants, forged documents, signatures that didn't match. Sarah read the names, her father's, hers. But the ink was wrong. Dates changed. Witnesses invented. They erased you, Jed said. No, Sarah whispered. They tried to. From behind them, a voice called out, "Trespassing's a crime, Vance." They turned. Judge Blackwood stood at the door, flanked by two deputies. Jed didn't flinch. "So's fraud." Blackwood smiled without warmth. "This town runs on the backs of men who know when to shut up." Sarah stepped forward, voice clear. "And on the bones of those who didn't." "Leo." The judge's eyes narrowed. "This is your final warning." "No," Jed said, "this is yours." They left before the tension snapped, but the line had been drawn, and both sides knew it. Back at the ranch, thunder growled across the desert. A storm brewed not in the sky, but in the hearts of men. Sarah found Jed sharpening a knife beneath the porch light. "You ever kill a man?" she asked. He paused. "Only when I had to." She nodded. "What about you?" She looked out toward the land. "Only in dreams." They sat in silence, side by side, their breaths syncing with the wind. Something had shifted, not just in the air but between them. "I never thanked you," she said finally. Jed looked at her. "Don't need to." She reached for his hand. "I want to." Their fingers met in the dark. Later that night, she woke with a start. Voices. Horses. Jed was already up, rifle in hand, coat half-buttoned. "Company," he said. They stepped outside. From the ridge, lanterns flickered like false stars. Blackwood's men. 6, maybe more. Quiet, but not subtle. Jed turned to Sarah. "Get the map, and the compass. You think they'll try tonight?" He nodded. "I think they already have." The next morning, dust churned in the sky. Blackwood stood at the edge of Sarah's land, a group of men behind him, miners, deputies, mercenaries. He raised a hand. "I come with lawful order," he shouted. Jed and Sarah stood near the porch, weapons visible, not raised. "This land was stolen," Blackwood continued, "and I'm here to return it to the people." "Your people," Jed called back. Sarah stepped forward. "This land remembers, and so do we." The judge's face tightened. "So be it." "Well." He waved a hand. His men surged forward, but Jed and Sarah were gone. Through the back pasture, they'd already slipped into the ravine map in hand, compass steady, heading toward the only place left untouched, the heart of the mine. It waited. Dark. Ancient. Hungry. Dusk painted the cliffs in streaks of copper and rust as the wind swept down from the high ridges, carrying the scent of dust and danger. Jedediah Vance led the way on foot now, his mare tied to a juniper trunk, ears twitching at every gust. Behind him, Seraphina gripped the old compass with both hands, her knuckles pale, her breath steady and measured. They'd left the ranch before dawn, taking a route only Jed remembered, a dry gully choked with thornbrush and sun-bleached bones, far from the trails the judge's men might know. They hadn't spoken much since the raid. There hadn't been time. Jed stopped at the base of a bluff, where the rocks slanted inward like a broken jaw. He ran a hand over the stone, fingers tracing a crack no wider than a finger. "This is it," he muttered. Sarah leaned in beside him, her breath warming the cold stone. "There's no door?" "There was," Jed said. "They buried it. Thought they could forget it that way." With a grunt, he pushed against the stone. Dust poured down. A section of the rock groaned, shifted, then gave way with a low, hollow sound. Darkness yawned open before them, a narrow tunnel, low and slanted, like a throat carved into the earth. Sarah tightened her grip on the compass and stepped in without hesitation. The tunnel stretched deep, deeper than either had expected. The air turned cooler, heavier with every step. Their lantern cast long shadows on the walls, revealing pick marks, old rails, rusted nails, ghosts of work long abandoned. "Smell that?" Jed asked quietly. "Sulfur," Sarah replied, voice flat. "And iron." "And death," Jed finished. They passed a split in the tunnel. One direction caved in, the other sloping downward, toward something ancient. The map had marked it with a symbol, a spiral wrapped in thorns. Jed's boots echoed on the stone floor as they descended. Around them, the silence wasn't silence at all. It was whispers, wind caught in the crevices, water dripping somewhere far below, and the subtle creak of wood strained by time. Then they saw it. The chamber opened like a cathedral, walls glinting gold under their lanterns' flicker. A vein wide as a wagon, snaking through quartz and granite, pulsing with wealth that had driven men mad. It shimmered like something alive. Sarah stopped short. "This is real." Jed didn't answer. His eyes were on the far wall. A carving, a warning. An eagle split in two, wings on fire. He reached out, touched it. "Your father was right," he said. "And yours," Sarah added. They stood there, surrounded by treasure that had cost their families everything. But there was no awe in their faces, only grief and fury. Then the explosion came. It started as a low rumble, then a blast of heat and grit from above. Rocks clattered behind them. The tunnel shook. "Dynamite," Jed hissed. Sarah grabbed his arm. "They're sealing us in." "No," Jed growled. "They're coming in." From the passage, voices echoed shouting, boots scrambling down, the metallic clatter of rifles. Jed pulled Sarah behind a pillar of quartz. "You said your father left traps down here?" She nodded. "Not for men, for something worse." "Good," he said grimly. "Men'll do just fine." He handed her his revolver. "Stay low. Aim for the legs." "What about you?" He smiled thinly. "I'm not aiming that low." The first figures emerged, deputies, mercenaries, one in a bowler hat too clean for the mine. Blackwood. The judge stepped forward, lantern in hand, gaze sweeping the chamber with the hunger of a starved wolf. "Well," he said. "Ain't it beautiful?" Jed stepped out from the shadows. "So's hell. Right before it opens." "Vree." Blackwood's smirk didn't falter. "You could have sold this claim, Vance. Made yourself a king." "I've seen what gold makes of kings," Jed replied. "They rot faster than the rest." The judge's men raised their weapons. Jed didn't move. "You can't kill me and expect to keep this hidden," Blackwood said. Jed shook his head. "I don't plan to keep it, or survive it." That gave the judge pause. Then Sarah stepped into the light, revolver steady in both hands. "This land is cursed," she said, "and you deserve every inch of it." Blackwood laughed. "You think shooting me'll stop what's coming? Gold changes everything, sweetheart. You can't bury that." "No," she said, "but we can bury you." She fired. The bullet struck the lantern in Blackwood's hand. Flames exploded into the air, catching his coat, his scream sharp and animal. Chaos erupted, gunfire, shouts, the thunder of boots on stone. Jed tackled a man to the ground, wrenched a rifle free. Sarah ducked behind a crate, firing once, twice, hitting a man in the knee. Then the ceiling cracked. Sarah felt at first the shift in pressure, the sudden hush. Her eyes darted to Jed. He looked up. "Now," he shouted. She sprinted toward the far tunnel, dragging a heavy satchel. Jed's backup plan. Explosives. Jed followed, limping, blood on his side. Behind them, Blackwood screamed orders, half his men down, the rest scrambling for cover. Jed slammed the satchel into the base of a support beam. He looked at Sarah, breath ragged. "Get out. I'm not leaving you." "You have to." "No." He grabbed her shoulders, bloodied hands shaking. "You have to live, Sarah. You're the proof, the last one left." She opened her mouth, but no words came. He kissed her forehead, then shoved her toward the tunnel. "Go!" Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she ran. Jed turned back, lit the fuse. The mine roared. Outside, Sarah burst from the rocks just as the earth convulsed. A column of dust and fire erupted behind her, throwing her to the ground. She covered her head, heart hammering, ears ringing. Then silence. Not peace, absence. She turned. The entrance was gone, just stone, and the compass, cracked, but still in her hand. It took her hours to make it back to the edge of the ranch. The sky was pale with dawn, and her body ached with every step. But she didn't stop. The townspeople were gathering by then, confused, murmuring about the blast. Deputies missing. The judge nowhere to be found. Sarah stood on the edge of the ridge, watching the sun rise. In her hand, she held Jed's notebook pages of maps, names, warnings. The truth, and she knew what to do. She walked into town, not to beg, not to flee, to speak, to fight, to finish what Jed died to begin. The wind had calmed by the time Sarah reached the ridge. Dust Devil Gulch shimmered below, a town built on want and wildfire, quieter now, as if the earth itself had gone still in mourning. She stood alone, Jed's satchel slung over her shoulder, her eyes locked on the place where the mountain had swallowed the vein, the gold, and the man who had given her everything. She'd left her old clothes in the cave. Now she wore Jed's duster, the sleeves rolled twice over her forearm. Around her neck hung the compass, cracked but still ticking true, and in her hand, the weathered notebook he'd carried, full of names, sketches, and quiet thoughts scribbled between survey lines. It smelled of sweat, of leather and dust, and of him. The townsfolk whispered when she walked into the square. Some stared. Others looked away. Judge Blackwood's absence had already stirred the air. No one knew where he'd gone. No one asked. But they knew. You don't light a fire that big under a mountain and expect silence. By midday, the saloon had emptied. The general store shuttered early, and a crowd began to form outside the old town hall. It wasn't justice they were after, not yet. It was certainty, someone to tell them what came next. Sarah stood before them, the ridge wind behind her. She opened Jed's notebook, found the page he'd marked before they descended, the one with the eagle carved in two. "My name is Serafina Vargas," she began. Her voice didn't tremble. "This town is built on land that doesn't forget." She told them about the map, the betrayal, the Mark Vang buried beneath the hills. She spoke of her father, of Jed, of the blood spilled not just by bullets, but by greed, over decades of silence. She read from the judge's own letters, copies Jed had made. Hidden among the sketches, letters where Blackwood offered bribes, planned seizures, marked which land to take and which families to ruin. The crowd shifted. Someone cursed. Someone else whispered, "He knew, all along." Sarah closed the notebook and held up the compass. "He died to bury that vein for good," she said. "So it couldn't be used again. Not to kill, not to corrupt, not to own." The wind picked up. No one cheered, but they listened, and that was enough. Weeks passed. The sheriff, once loyal to Blackwood, quietly disappeared. A preacher from Carson City rode in, opened the old chapel again. And Sarah? She stayed. Not in town. Not in Jed's cabin either. She built her own. On the edge of the land her father once guarded. She laid the beams with her own hands, hauled stone from the creek bed, planted mesquite and desert wildflowers in the yard. The neighbors helped where they could, not out of pity but respect. She never asked for much, but the garden bloomed. Inside the new cabin, she kept few things: the compass, the notebook, a tin cup Jed once used to measure soil weight, and the laban her father had carved names into. All of them men who never made it out of that mine. Their names now hung above the mantel, burned into cedar. At night, she sat by the fire and read aloud, not to herself, but to the silence, to the spirits, to Jed. Sometimes she'd hear coyotes yip in the distance and smile, thinking of his curse words when they raided the chicken coop. Sometimes she'd talk to the stars, and sometimes, when the wind blew just right, she swore she could hear his voice say, "Told you, it wasn't just a story." Then came spring. The creek ran again. Children returned to what was left of the schoolhouse, and the town, once gasping from gold fever, began to breathe again. One morning, Sarah stood by the ridge, staring at the place where the mine had collapsed. There was no marker, no gravestone, only stone and scrub, and the soft hum of wind weaving through the rocks. She knelt down and pressed her palm to the earth. "Still holding?" she asked quietly. The ground didn't answer, but she felt it. The quiet, the promise. She rose and turned back toward the trail and stopped. A figure stood at the edge of her land, a rider, young, maybe 16, wide brim hat, tan skin. On the back of his pony was a rolled blanket and a pickaxe. The boy looked at her the way townsfolk used to look at Jed, half awe, half fear. "You Serafina Vargas?" he asked. "I am." "My ma said you knew things," he said. "About the land, about what not to dig." Sarah crossed her arms. "Depends who's asking." He shifted awkwardly, then pulled a worn envelope from his vest. "My uncle was one of Blackwood's men, died in the cave. He left this, said if I ever wanted to not make the same mistakes, I should find you." She took the letter, weighed it in her palm. "What's your name?" "Tomas." "You looking for gold, Tomas?" "No, ma'am," he said, honest and firm. "I'm looking for the truth." Sarah smiled, a small, soft smile. "Then leave that pickaxe here," she said. "We'll start with a shovel and a question." He nodded. And just like that, the teaching began. By summer's end, Sarah had 3 students, 2 boys and a girl. They built a table beneath the cottonwoods and mapped the old fault lines with stones and chalk. They studied the plants that grew only near broken soil, the way wind moved around hills. They learned about what was buried, not just gold, but stories, warnings, lessons. Sarah taught them what Jed had taught her, that not all treasure is meant to be found, that some veins bleed more than gold, that sometimes the greatest act of love is to bury something deep and never go back for it. At night, she sat by her fire, her belly rounding now with new life. A child, unexpected but not unwanted. Her hand would rest over it, feeling the flutter of possibility, and she'd whisper name, Jed, Aylin, truth. The child would grow beneath stars and smoke, in a house built on both sorrow and strength. And when they asked, years later, who their father was, Sarah would take down the notebook, place the compass in their palm, and say, he was a man who cut through rock to find something softer than gold. Time moved. Dust Devil Gulch faded from maps. The gold dried up, or maybe it was never there to begin with. But some folks remembered an old story. About a man who died for a truth no one else could see. About a woman who stayed behind not to mourn, but to guard. And a mountain that never gave back what it swallowed. One autumn evening, far from any trail, a traveler camped at the base of a broken ridge. He built a small fire and brewed bitter coffee in a rusted pot. Nearby, he saw a strange shape in the cliff wall, like a doorway sealed shut with stone. When he asked a passing merchant about it the next day, the old man only nodded and said, "That's where the gold sleeps." The traveler raised an eyebrow. "You mean a mine?" The old man shook his head. "Number A grave." And he left it at that, because some stories ain't meant for loud places. Some names are better whispered, and some love never stops burning quiet as coals beneath the earth. Years passed. The child grew tall under desert sun and cottonwood shade, with eyes dark like Sarah's and a mind sharp like Jed's. They named him Elias not after the judge, but to reclaim the name, to give it new roots, new meaning. "Names don't own people," Sarah told him one evening. "We choose what they carry." Elias learned the land before he could read. He knew which rocks sang when rain came, which lizards signaled change in the wind. He asked questions the way some boys ask for candy, insistently, endlessly, and Sarah never turned him away, not even when the questions hurt. "Did my father love you?" She'd pause sometimes, but always answer. "More than gold," she'd whisper. "More than the stars." Lo! At night, Elias sat by the fire, tracing his fingers over the carvings on the old compass, now dulled from years of handling. Was he brave? Sarah nodded. Braver than I ever was. But in truth, bravery had changed shape for her. It wasn't only facing a gun or lighting a fuse, it was staying. Raising a child in a world that once wanted to bury her. It was teaching when no one asked her to. It was walking into town every few months, standing tall in the very square where they'd once condemned her, and letting the past see her alive and unbroken. The town softened with time. Dust Devil Gulch no longer whispered judgment. Instead, they nodded when she passed, some wave. The saloon closed for good, replaced by a dry goods store run by a widow who asked Sarah for lessons in plant medicine. The school reopened with a new teacher, Sarah herself, at first, then later Elias, when he was old enough to take her place. Every year, on the day the mine collapsed, she and Elias returned to the ridge. They'd leave 3 things at the sealed stone: a wildflower, a pinch of red earth, and a name spoken aloud. Not Jed's, they said that one every day, but the names of others, the forgotten, the betrayed, the greedy, the lost. Even Blackwood, because remembrance was a kind of justice, too. One spring, when Elias was 17, he returned from town carrying an old map tucked under his arm. Sarah froze when she saw it. He laid it out across the table. Her father's markings, Jed's notations, a red line circling the base of a new ridge. "Someone found a second entrance," he said quietly. Sarah looked up. "How?" "Old drunk at the store said his granddad used to talk about a side door, a crack never fully sealed. I followed the coordinates. There's something there, Ma." "Oh." Sarah didn't speak. Her fingers clenched the edge of the table. Elias hesitated. "I'm not going down there. I know what you and Dad gave up. I just thought you should know." She nodded. Later that night, when the fire had burned low and Elias had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone on the porch. Her hands trembled not with fear, but with the weight of memory. She whispered into the night, "You were supposed to be gone forever." But the past, like gold, never stayed buried. It shimmered, it waited, and sometimes it called back. Days passed. Sarah dreamed of the mine again, of Jed's hand in hers, of the echo of boots behind her and the scent of smoke in the rocks. When she woke, her hands were dirty, as if she'd been digging in her sleep. Elias watched her carefully. He didn't ask, didn't push, but he stayed close. One afternoon, she called him over. "I need to go back," she said. Elias paled. "Into the mine?" "No," she said. "To the door, just the door." "Len?" He nodded. They rode at dawn. The sky was pale and wide, clouds smeared like charcoal over blue. The new entrance wasn't far hidden between shale cliffs, obscured by scrub, but it was there, a slit in the earth. Breathing, Sarah stood before it, hand resting on the stone. "I came to seal you once," she whispered. "Now I come to warn you again." She knelt, pulled a leather pouch from her saddlebag. Inside, a small bundle of crushed red roots, sage, and a stone marked with a seminal symbol for protection. She placed them at the entrance, murmuring prayers between breaths. When she stood, the air felt different, heavier, a little more at peace. Elias touched her shoulder. "Is it over?" "No," she said, turning to him. "But we're ready this time." They left the ridge in silence. Behind them, the wind stirred gently, like a spirit exhaling. Years turned again. Elias married a healer's daughter from New Mexico, sharp-eyed and gentle-voiced. Together they built a larger lodge, raised 2 children, and ran a school that taught more than letters. It taught stories, land, loss, resistance. Sarah grew older, her hair streaked with gray, her steps slower but steady. She sat often on her porch, watching her grandchildren chase each other through the dust, their laughter echoing where once there had been silence. One night, Elias found her beneath the stars, notebook in hand. "You writing again?" he asked. She smiled, trying to remember it all. "Before it fades." He sat beside her, handed her a mug of tea. She flipped a page, showing him the words scrawled there. "Jedediah Vance, born of dust, died for truth." "I never told you," she said, voice soft. "But he asked me once what I'd do if I had no more fear." "And what did you say?" She looked up at the sky, where stars blinked like old promises. "I said I'd plant something." She turned to Elias. "And I did." He squeezed her hand. They sat together, mother and son, survivor and seed, while the desert whispered around them. The wind carried no gold, only stories. And that was enough.